And then you can zoom in with this.
Okay.
And when you get your shot set, you know, you can adjust
let's I'm going to let you kind of fill the viewfinder with the stage, and I don't think I will change much.
Okay.
Once you set it up, you sit where I'm at, and go ahead. And really, all I got to do is get started.
We'll go around.
And so we get the podium and the people.
On behalf of Frank's family, we would like to welcome you all and thank you for coming today. Your support and your love of Frank really means a lot to us. And we would especially like to thank Stephanie Caltagirone, hopefully I got that right, and her friends for helping us organize this memorial. Stephanie, your love and support and help have been very much appreciated in this difficult time, and I don't think we could have pulled this off today without you. So we thank you very much. So my name is Megan, and I am Frank's niece. My mom Margaret is his sister, and I am up here today to give you a very biased and very ineloquent tribute to my Uncle Finky. And many of you knew him as Frank or even Francis. For the entirety of my life, he has been Uncle Finky. When my brother Rob was just a little baby or learning to speak, he couldn't get his R's right for anything. And so Frank became Fink, and Fink became Finky. So Uncle Finky was born. I think I should also mention that a very, very dear friend of ours, of the family, when he was a teenager, nicknamed him Skunk. And that has stuck for, 50 years at this point, Mom? So something along those lines. So, yes. And I think you can notice the trend that's happening there. So, My whole life, Uncle Finky was someone who encouraged my love of reading and my aspirations to write, and would encourage me when I needed it, or give me a slap on the back of the head when I needed that too, which, hey, was very appropriate. He always knew when I needed a hug or when I just needed a quiet word of encouragement. He was the one who showed up. He was the one who, when you showed up, my God, you never knew what was going to happen, but you knew it wouldn't be boring. Uncle Finky was larger than life. He was many things. He was perpetually late. It's the one that springs to mind the most. So much so that we always knew to expect him a good hour and a half, 2 hours, to the time we originally told him to come. Yes. And when trying to think of words to describe him, besides late, it was pretty easy. Stubborn, opinionated, mulish, bullheaded, obstinate, ornery, you get the idea. But most important, he was unapologetic. Finky was who he was, and if you didn't like it, he didn't care. Why waste the energy when he couldn't control what other people thought? Especially when he could use that energy, or when he could use that energy to heckle conservatives and politicians. So, my favorite incident of his disregard for the norm and what other people expected happened at my sister-in-law Tammy's baby shower. It was probably about an hour into the proceedings, and the doorbell rings, and then open the door, and lo and behold, who's there with Uncle Finky. He's uninvited, and very, very pleased with himself at having crashed the party. Good smile, a bottle of whiskey in hand. But it made the day brighter, and it made it more special. You just didn't want to miss out on any of the fun. So I say thank you, Uncle Finky, for showing me the courage and the brass it takes to be yourself 100% of the time. Family has always been important to him. My most cherished memories took place during our Christmases. I know it was his favorite holiday, and it's one of mine as well. It's a time for family and a time for love. There are many rituals that we've all come to expect over the years. Presents for everyone he had gone shopping for in the basement of the family home that's been in the house and been in the family for 66 years was always a favorite. And of course, it was always wrapped in back issues of the Rock River Times. Yes, and I think the most memorable gift was a taxidermied roadkill pheasant that had been affixed to the green pool felt background, complete with tire treads across it. That one was regifted for many years. No Christmas was complete without his feast of gourmet cheeses and sausages. We would always overeat and sit on the couch and moan, but it was always really good. And it was amazing, and of course he would always be chasing someone around with that little slice of Limburger cheese, trying to get someone to taste it. And invariably one of us fell for it. I think we burned, but I guess not. So Uncle Finky was always most happy in the middle of things, in the thick of them. Whether it was singing Christmas carols with us, and that only happened once, or the time he broke the kitchen table fighting with my cousin Mikey over a spoon during our yearly tournament of spoons. He liked to tell us stories about our eccentric relatives and have a drink in their honor. What was important was that we were together and we were enjoying being a family. And he loved nothing more than being the reason that we did that. The joy and love that we all felt and that we all had every Christmas combined and continue to be a part of our family history. And that was mostly due to a lot of him. Uncle Finky has left behind a wonderful legacy. No one can deny that. His work with the environment and the arts is very impressive. And most notably, the Rock River Trail, I think, is what he was most proud of. but what I can say is that I was and am loved. Uncle Finky loved me and our family unconditionally and unreservedly. And in being so loved, he taught me how to do the same. The love he's given me, I can now pass on to others, which will continue on in this world. And by God, wouldn't he love that hippy-dippy sentiment? And this is, I think, the most lasting and meaningful legacy that anyone could hope to leave and be proud of. So here's to you, Uncle Finky. We love you and we're gonna really miss you.
One of the most valuable things we can do to heal one another is to listen. I'm not sure that we're really very good at that at this moment in time in our community and in our world, but it's good to be here today and to listen to one another's stories. My name is Marty Franz. I'm the director of the Music Academy in Rockford, and these folks over here are my colleagues and my students and one of our alums. And I have just a few stories that I'd like to tell you about Frank. Frank was a champion of local causes and organizations. He loved and he championed the Rock River, Beatty Park with its Indian mounds, local musicians, and somewhat tattered old houses, boats, books, poets, and scholars. I met Frank through Dr. Peter and Eleanor Stanlis. Peter was Frank's English professor, a mentor, and a financier. Dr. Stanlis, Peter, was a fellow book lover, a scholar, and a poet. With his crumpled sport coat and ties that smelled vaguely of old books, Peter was the fashion plate to which Frank aspired. Mrs. Stanlis was my colleague, my mentor, and my partner in the beginning of the Music Academy. A funny thing about Mrs. Stanlis, no one ever told her no. Not me, not my friend Rachel over there at the piano, or John Rossman, her student, or Frank. Therefore, because no wasn't an option, Frank and I were often odd fellow dinner guests when the Stanlises entertained. We shared many a laugh over Mrs. Stanlis's cucumber jello salad and the eccentricity of what then we regarded as a lovely, if somewhat esoteric, older couple. Frank and I now are the ages that the Stanlises would have been then. What I loved about Frank was that he showed up. Maybe late, but he showed up. He stood up and he applauded. He said thanks. Thanks for making a difference in the lives of Music Academy students and through them in the quality of life in our community. He understood it. He got it, totally. He understood what we do, and he understood how important it is that we fan the flames in our community. He brought whatever resources he had to the table in support of the causes and organizations he believed in. For the Music Academy, he introduced us to the RAMI organization. And today, RAMI is one of the most important organizations supporting our student scholarship program. It was huge in terms of making what we do affordable and accessible. And we are very grateful to Frank for introducing us to the RAMI folks. He also opened the pages of the Rock River Times so we could market the school at no cost. Huge for an entrepreneurial, small, not-for-profit school like ours is. Personally, he cheered me on when I confessed to being overwhelmed by trying to make our little school work. He would call me by his pet name, Martius. And I think he believed I could do it, and so I did it. Our lives are like vapor. We're here for a while, and then we're gone. And every moment we have is important. And at some level, I think Frank understood that. His instinct was to lift up and celebrate organizations and causes that made and continue to make considerable and necessary contributions to the well-being of our community. Organizations that will live on and prosper in part because of Frank's life's work and his passions. And for that, I am grateful, and I want to say thanks to Frank. We should all be grateful and appreciative for what Frank did. He was a good guy. It was a life well loved. My friends and I are now going to play a Music Academy very brief favorite. We call it the Rock River Twinkle. It was arranged by Mary Ann Anderson, who was one of our faculty members. You'll hear snippets of Mozart's Twinkle theme, Proud Mary, which is rolling on the river, and Old Man River. We play it to lift up and celebrate the passing of a Rockford institution and an Old Man River, Frank Schier.
We're Bob and Sonia Vogel. I want you to look at that picture of Frank in his canoe. Catch that twinkle in his eye. Compare it to the twinkle in him as a young boy. And one of my favorite stories of Frank involves his sisters, who were left to take care of him during the days when Mother was gone for a while. And when he became too overwhelming, they squeezed him into the basement, locked the door, ran to the basement entryway, took out the garden hose, and made sure he didn't come out. He had that enthusiasm for life forever. And when he invited us up to his house and told us he only had 2 to 4 months to live, we shed some tears together. Yeah.
Well, Frank, tears were more about what he thought was his failure, not about his impending death. He was afraid that he hadn't accomplished enough and he hadn't contributed enough to this area, to Rockford. And how pleased he would be today if he knew who's here.
We assured him he was well liked, but he just had that doubt, like many of us do. And so that's why we took that ad out in the paper, acknowledging his contributions before his death, which is a little strange, I guess, but we felt the audience would be here to acknowledge his contributions. And each time we come to Rockford, we miss his presence. He was our tour guide. He took us to the darndest places. We met we thought we had strange friends, but he had. So we're looking for a tour guide. No one could ever replace Frank. We need some assistance. Rekindling some of those visits and enjoyable times we had with him. And like all of you, we're certainly going to miss him. We promised we'd be brief.
So it's my swing at the pinata. My name is Greg Farnham. I have the pleasure and privilege of serving as the coordinator of Frank's Vision for the Rock River. I serve as the coordinator for the Rock River Trail Initiative. And thinking my drive down from Wisconsin later this morning, thinking about what things I'm going to like to share with friends and family of Frank. A couple of books little meditation books I usually look at each morning, and a couple of days ago there was one of the readings stayed with me. It talked about the personal perceptions that we bring to a particular event or activity or person that makes it special for us, and it may be different with other people. Typically is. And a couple of the stories pertain to 3 people spending a night on top of a mountain. And being interviewed the following morning, they had 3 different stories. One person saw and was in awe of the beauty and majesty of the mountain. The second person had some fear of heights and fear of the unknown and the darkness of night. The third person was as comfortable as a bug in a rug and slept the whole night and didn't have much perception of what went on that evening. And as it is with people we meet, and each person here has his or her own perception of their experience with Frank. My experience is through the Rock River Trail Initiative. And some of you know that is Frank's vision to establish a system of recreational trails along the river, on and along the river through both states, Wisconsin and Illinois. And he was very, very clear on that. So this was not a we versus they, Wisconsin versus Illinois, or Illinois versus Wisconsin, but one overall unifying element, which is the river, from the headwaters in south central Wisconsin down to the confluence with the Mississippi at the Quad Cities. I met Frank February 2011. He organized a meeting of a number of different stakeholders along the river in both states at the Clock Tower Hotel west of here. Bob and Sonia were there. I had the chance to meet them for the first time. And Frank and I often joked that my big mistake was to ask him after the meeting whether he needed any help. And his reply was, hell yes. And we all have those moments when our lives change. Well, for me, that was a life-changing moment. 6 years ago, going on 7 years ago, and my time with Frank was very, very special, and special in a number of different ways. I very early on sensed his passion for his life, for life in general, and certainly for his own life. His passion for Native American culture, the history of the region, and those who have gone before us and those who will follow in our footsteps. And of course, the river has celebrated in verse and song and recreational activities. And I was impressed with hearing Frank at the Clock Tower meeting and he and I began working together to implement his vision for the Rock River Trail. He had started the year before, I think it was April 2010 was the inaugural paddle from Oregon to Grand Detour, I think, Bob. And he had already spent time, I think, with his newspaper staff, coming up with a logo for the Rock River Trail, which is on the canoe, at the bow, the left bow. And I believe there were a couple of photographs of Frank with the logo. I'd asked him about it, and he had a competition. Apparently, a young staff member developed the logo. And he had, using his powers of persuasion, had arranged for the Winnebago County GIS department to provide a lot of maps to us free of charge. Frank and I began working very closely, and it was a real privilege for me to learn about him and learn his many talents and gifts. We had a little competition. One of the first things we needed to do was to make our organization real in the sense of being accepted on paper by the 41 different communities, cities and villages, and 11 counties along the river. So we started, I started from the headwaters, and he started from the confluence, working our way towards the state line, meeting with villages and counties and city officials to get letters of support, formal resolutions of support of the Rock River Trail Initiative. Every Friday we would call each other, and I would say, well, got one from Watertown, and one from Ixonia, and one from Beloit. He said, well, I've got one better. I got one from Rockford, and Milan, and Moline, and Grand Detour. And so it would go. Our first formal introduction of the Rock River Trail was to the State Trails Council of Wisconsin up near Portage. And that was in July of 2011. And both Frank and I gave a presentation to the council. We followed that shortly thereafter with a presentation to the Illinois Greenways and Trails Council down in Springfield. And things just blossomed. We formed a council, a management council, of which Bob has been a key member. And we affiliated with the Friends of the Rock River, which is the creation of Bob and Sonia. Have wonderful people from each of the counties and a number of the NGOs, non-governmental organizations throughout the river corridor serving with us. And this is the vehicle that makes it work. And early on, we focused our attention on establishing a water trail, which was Frank's first passion, and worked very diligently on that. And we were the 10th, or still are, we are the 10th National Water Trail, designated by the National Park Service and the U.S. Department of the Interior. And that was done in spring of 2013. We followed that shortly thereafter with a lot of work with the state legislatures in Springfield and Madison to establish the scenic and historic Rock River route for driving. And Frank's tagline for the Rock River Trail was hike it, bike it, drive it, paddle it, kayak it, and canoe it. So we needed a biking trail, which we have created, a hiking trail, which we've created, and it has gone further than that. We now have a horse trail along the river. We have an air route which links all of the 10 airports from Rock Island all the way up to Juneau, and have worked with some wonderful people at the different airports and private pilots. And we have an art route, some of you know, playing with Frank's love for the art. We established an art route with a separate logo and a pamphlet that he worked diligently on with the newspaper group, and it has been published. And not to be forgotten, by those of us who love chocolate, we have a Rock River chocolate trail. It has its own logo. We've developed some beautiful little chocolate trails, chocolate turtles, developed very, very well under the last 6 years of working with Frank. And sincerely, I sincerely grieve that he is unable to see the fruits of his efforts fully blossom. We were going to get together. He was up at UW Hospital. I talked with him on Sunday, and we're going to get together on Thursday to go over the plans for the grand opening of the Rock River Trail, which will be held June 3rd in Beloit and South Beloit. Called him Sunday. We talked about getting together Thursday, and Tuesday night I received the word that he had passed away. Very important legacy for him, and this is my perception of the man. His work with me and many others on developing his vision for the Rock River Trail. It's been a special privilege for me to work with the guy. Remember him? We would get together and BS back and forth every once in a while. He talked about his time paddling, his first time paddling the Rock River. He put in just downstream of Waupun on the South Branch, one of the headwaters, that flows into the Horicon Marsh, which is a large 30,000 acre marsh up in south central Wisconsin, the headwaters of the Rock. The northern 2/3, I'll say it differently, the southern 1/3, 10,000 acres, is owned and managed by the state, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and is open to the public, and we encourage recreational use. The northern 2/3, 20,000 acres, is owned by the federal government and managed by the U.S. Department of the Interior Fish and Wildlife Service. It is a wildlife refuge. Birds are welcome, canoeists and paddlists are not. Well, Frank claims he didn't know that. I'm not sure I can trust that. Back in 1990, what is that, 27 years ago, so he would have been in his early 30s, he put his canoe in the South Branch, paddled into the National Refuge.
Hi, I'm John Rosman. This is Ross Thompson, Red Weber on bass, and we are the Screw City Swingers. Frank was a dear friend of all of ours and an ardent supporter of live music around town, so here we go.
name is Tom Fleming. I'm an old friend of Frank's, and like many of his old friends, we were sparring partners. I occasionally served as his punching bag. I have a question I want to ask everybody. Are there any knuckleheads out here? How about anybody ever called Bucky? Have you ever had your arm pounded or your back slapped so hard that you felt it 2 days later? Then you know Frank. When Frank Schier walked into a room with his hearty har-har laugh and his breezy, hearty familiarity, it always hit me that he must have been a pirate in a previous existence. I'd only met him once or twice when he fell into calling me Tommy, a name I had not allowed anybody to use outside my family since I was 12 years old. With anybody else, I would have resented it. With Frank, I just responded by forever calling him Frankie, or, when he really disliked, Francis. I called him that for the rest of his much too brief life. For a while, Frank and I had a local access TV show. I think it probably had the lowest ratings in the history of TV. And I occasionally wrote restaurant pieces for the Rock River Times. And so maybe they'll put that in my tombstone. Frank was a larger-than-life character, I think we all know that, with an enormous appetite for living. I'm not referring specifically to his eating habits. Though in his glory days, his eating, the only word I can use to describe it, it was prodigious. Eating with Frank was always an adventure. Like the true gourmet that he was, he had his own rating system for restaurants and meals. Some food critics use stars or forks to indicate their approval or the quality of the restaurant. But Frank would rate a dinner in terms of oinks. That was 5 oinks, he would say, after eating one of my wife's exquisite dinners. Some years ago, a group of us had driven out of Springfield for various business. Frank was going to check out contributions to Rockford politicians. If there are any Rockford politicians here, you don't have to swerve. I'm not going to reveal anything. Frank had eaten an enormous lunch that I believe included Springfield's disgusting signature dish, the famous horseshoe sandwich, described on the internet as thick sliced toasted Texas toast, a large hamburger patty, French fries, and a secret cheese sauce that seems remarkably like Cheese Whiz melted in a pan. By the time we hit the LaSalle, Peru area, it was about 3:30, and Frank had to stop for a little snack. A double cheeseburger, large order of fries, and a milkshake, hoping this would tide him over till we got to Rockford. Once we went on a camping trip with my younger son Garrett on Lake Koshkonong. Well, we stopped for groceries in Fort Atkinson. Now, since I was very small, I've always got stuck being the camp cook, so I'm used to ordering food for camping trips and having to cook out. I bought maybe 50% more than we could possibly eat because both Frank and Garrett were big eaters. Well, Frank looked at my shopping cart in disgust. He quickly added string cheese, bologna, salami, another dozen eggs, another pound of bacon, several large bags of generic potato chips. Next morning, and 2 cases of beer. Next morning, as usual, I was making breakfast. I gave each of us 2 or 3 eggs, 3 or 4 strips of bacon, a lot of toast and coffee. And when we finished what is for me a gigantic breakfast, Frank and Garrett then turned around and scrambled a dozen eggs and cooked a pound of bacon and ate it. I could spend the afternoon telling of some of Frank's exploits in eating, but there was even a pizza named after him at Canova's. I wanted them to change the name to Sheer Madness, but Frank wouldn't have it. The first time I met Frank, it was after a political event here in Rockford, and it was getting late, and so people proposed that we go out to eat. But all the suggestions were for one or another chain restaurant out on the east side cancer that was already spreading towards Chicago. It's if you ever saw the Daily Show program on the Wisconsin legislators who holed up there at the Tilted Kilt. They called it the Forbidden Zone. Well, Frank refused to go up to the Forbidden Zone and insisted that you had to eat downtown, usually at the Irish Rose or some other local joint. But when I said that Frank had an enormous appetite for living, I really wasn't thinking of food, but primarily of the gusto he displayed in everything he took an interest in. From putting out his weekly paper, to canoeing the Rock River, learning guitar, writing poetry, promoting interest in the local music scene, and taking part in every conspiracy against the powers that be here in Rockford. Was he always successful? Always prudent? Even a little careful? No. But we could never give Frank less than an E for effort, even for his poetry. Speaking of political conspiracies, I really got to know him during the patriotic uprising against a foreign ruler that was occupying Rockford. I'm referring to Magistrate Michael Mahoney, who after all did come from Freeport. And Mahoney had after all assumed dictatorial power over the Rockford School District. It was during that fight against the Rockford Register-Star and the local political gang that continues to run Rockford that a kind of robber band of rebels emerged. It was like one of those movies, that begins, like the Magnificent Seven or the Dirty Dozen. You have to go around collecting all the misfits, dropouts, losers, eccentrics. And then in the end, they accomplish a miracle. It was Chris Bowman, Stephanie Caltagirone, other school board members like Patty DeLucas and Ted Biondo. There were even people in government like Mariana Yellow and Pete McKay, especially when there was the fight over the quick take of part of the Ditzler farm. There were so many fights in those days, so few victories, but it never seemed to depress Frank's indomitable spirit. Frank threw himself into every fight, often with more enthusiasm than reflection, and his occasional fit of recklessness caused breaches and quarrels with some of his oldest friends. I can't tell you how many times I had to serve as intermediary with, say, Chris Bowman, or try to patch things up with Mike Leifheit. But I finally figured out what the key to Frank's personality was. He was half Irish, half German. The Irish half was constantly coming up with crazy ideas that the ordinary Irishman would just get drunk and then forget about it the next day. But Frank, being half German, he would cling to it with tenacity. It was always easy to quarrel with Frank, but very difficult to stay angry with him. And to those few who hated him, and continue to hate him to this day, I can only say that if they want to know the source of their anger and hatred, they should really look in the mirror and not look to Frank. Right. The hallmark of Frank was his loyalty to friends who could never pay him back for the incredible kindness which he showed over and over. It's already been mentioned, his Peter Stanlis and Eleanor Stanlis, who had Eleanor created perhaps the most significant cultural institution in Rockford, and from which our own children benefited so much over the years in their music lessons. His friend, the poet Red Hargraves, who had a letter praise from Ezra Pound. Frank was, I think, the only person in Rockford who knew all of that. But, even though these people were often quite different from Frank, Peter Stanlis was a rock rib, right-wing conservative and good Catholic. He was 180 degrees away from most of what Frank believed, but this in no way could interrupt Frank's loyalty or his friendship. Frank Schier was one of the last people on earth who really loved Rockford, both for what it is and for what he thought it could be. He went out to the West Coast for a while where he, as he put it, he had a blast. But he had to come back here. And despite a string of disappointments, He stayed here as a living embodiment of the local historical and cultural memory. Frank could tell you stories of Black Hawk all day, or he could even make sense out of an Indian mound when you're walking around Lake Koshkonong. What looked to me like just heaps of eroded mud, Frank would see, he said, well, that's a turtle, or that's a deer. That's improbably, he'd say, that's a crocodile. I'd say, well, where did that come from? Well, it swam up the Rock River. I think if Frank went out to a golf course, he could see all the greens as Indian mounds. But Frank's imagination could see things not just as they happened to be, but as they were supposed to be. And if he were here, I would quote to him a poem from Wallace Stevens, the man with the blue guitar, who played things not as they are. Frank was forever nudging Rockford in the right direction, toward cleaning up the river, toward preserving the historic downtown, toward enlivening and enriching our local culture. Sometimes his gentle nudges turned into hectoring and bullying, but everything he did was out of love for his city, the river, and the people. Rockford will survive the loss of Frank Schier, but it's going to be a different place for a long time. It'll be colder, it'll be less interesting. When I was a child, I used to wonder, whatever happened to the Greek gods or the Norse gods? Did they go away? Did they die? I decided that so long as somebody worshiped them and loved them, they would still be alive somewhere. And I think the same thing is true of Rockford. As long as Frank Schier was here to love it, Rockford would continue to exist. Without Frank to love it, will Rockford be alive anymore? Well, I know we'll all miss it. And all I have to say in conclusion is, so long, knucklehead. It was good to know you.
Good afternoon. So many great stories and powerful words about Frank. I'm here to celebrate Frank's life with all of you, and I'm humbled. Tim Dempke, our executive director, couldn't make it today. I'm David Spencer, operations director for the Rockford Park District, and honored to represent the men and women of the Rockford Park District as well. We collaborated with Frank for many years on a lot of different initiatives, many of which you've heard today. Many in the room, we worked on initiatives such as the Rock River Trail, the Rock River Sweep, anything that floats, raft race, Arbor Day tree giveaways. Frank always leading the charge, always giving us the trees like that morning. You know, it was cool. We were ready for it though, so we were always prepared. All of these projects, in each experience, Frank was walking the talk by improving and caring, as just eloquently stated, caring for his community and our planet. All of these projects combined with running the Rock River Times, all the Rammy stuff he had going, was truly impressive. I just don't know how he accomplished so many things. It was truly, truly impressive. Through the Park District, we'll be working with numerous people to memorialize Frank through tree planting and a plaque. We're still working out some of those details, but we're certain to get a tree in the spring for Frank. I know you all have special memories and thoughts of Frank, and I'm thankful that the family let me share a few words today. Rest in peace, Frank. We'll miss you.
I have an important announcement to make later, and this is my mnemonic. To remind me, if before we're done with our segment, I don't mention, remind me, I'll tell you. Come on, John. This first song we'll do, although I own the copyright, I can't exactly claim credit for it. I feel like it came to me. I woke up one morning, on a Sunday morning, in a deep dream, dreaming that I was singing to Roy Orbison, which would have been hard to do for a number of reasons, but went to my keyboard, computer keyboard, and within about 10 minutes this song was there. It's particularly relevant to my memories of Frank because we were doing a program of Roy Orbison music, and Frank said, instead of writing a press release, I think you need a story about a seance with Roy Orbison. And we wrote one. John wrote most of it. Did anybody read it? You can Google it. I think you can still Google it. I think it.
I forgot about that.
This ought to be good.
So where would that be published?
Rock River Time.
Oh, and we'll just go to the archives.
Yeah.
I see those beckoning sea. I hear song that Ron has written.
Yes, there's a little tiny difference in the program because sometimes there's a little magic that happens, and today Frank's dear sister Margaret had a second poem from Frank that she would like to have read. So we decided we would do it in segments so that the Black Hawk one would get its private showing in a sense. So what I want to say first is a little bit about Frank. Frank was my private Jack Nicholson. As has been stated, he was larger than life. He was a character filled with joie de vivre. Frank was a person of passion, a poetic soul capable of grand hyperbole, colossal joviality, a bellowing laugh, and pet names for everyone. You probably had a pet name. Mine was Chrissy, which nobody called me except Frank. Frank's mind and moods could stretch straight around a rainbow, high as a star, and as low as a carp feeding in the Rock River. And Frank did love his River of Hearts, which is the poem that arrived today. So I'm kind of excited about that. Maybe it is because Frank had a heart like a mighty river, flowing and floating and meandering in a canoe or a houseboat. And let's just say it, like a river, he liked to make waves, big ones. Frank didn't shy away from controversy, and he didn't cotton to any party lines. You never knew just what you would find each week in our beloved Rock River Times. For decades, I was the recipient of his largesse. Most of you may not realize how hard it is for a poet to have a built-in audience, which is what Rock River Times gave me. Our literary friendship started in the early 80s when, believe it or not, Frank just arrived at my door, literally. The doorbell rang, and there was Frank Schier, who I'd never met before. He had returned from Seattle and heard that I was a poet. He tells me my first response was, "Who the H are you?" For many years, he was a poetic force in town, creating the Rockford Writers Theater, which met at the old storefront cinema and post office. Frank was not a snob, saw potential in all people, and welcomed anyone into our little bohemian band of poets, we who passed the hat after various performances. Frank saw the poet in me in a way that probably no other colleague ever since has. Because of Frank's endeavors, my first chapbook was published. In other words, he launched my career in poetry, and that is a gift that cannot be repaid. Like many artists, thinkers, avant-garde dreamers, and schemers, Frank was complex. While he loved the underdog and had a wide berth of tolerance and compassion, was a warrior, a karate expert, a community activist, an environmental crusader. His Rock River cleanups are legendary. And in a unique way, Frank was a feminist, capable of great sentiment regarding his mother and his Aunt Lil, both of whom he adored and loved. Frank and I didn't talk much about religion except to say that both of us were raised Catholic. I saw in Frank a person who was capable of that special kind of Catholic adoration and the ability to put certain people on pedestals and in other words, sainting them. God bless him. There was no one like him. Two recent memories of Frank keep cropping up in my mind. At a New Year's Eve party, I just could not get the guests to mingle. And do you know why? Our very own Frankers was holding court at the dining room table, which sits six, but had a dozen people listening to the latest in Frankendom. And then just last summer, boating with a friend on the Rock River, what do I see but the Rock River Times houseboat jogging by with Frank at the helm, waving. That is my actual last memory of Frank. And in closing, I would like to read, actually not the poem I was originally going to read, which I'll read after the music, but the gift of today, the beginning of Frank's The River of Hearts. And the introductory note says, The Rock River grows on a map like a tree, backwards yet forwards, from its thin northern branches and its burrow-like lakes. These are Frank's words, by the way. Acting as roots, coursing to the southern main trunk, hanging off the Mississippi's eastern cliff-like face. The sap waters flow down rather than up, the rock tree to give more moving ground to the nation's dividing line. As the big river divides the nation's many parts, so flows the rock on a similar, more secret scale, kept from you, the reader, the potential unknown traveler, by the depths of the many hitherto silent hearts in the soulful current of the heartland. And here is the beginning of his long poem, which is not available, The River of Hearts. For 3 months before the day, the Rock River's spring rushing permeated, soaked his dreams. He heard the guiding up forces drawing a virtual blue map of the river's golden green course. Marshes of voices bogged his sleep, endless swirlings all enchanting. Find the child, today. The book, history, myth, figures swam out of the deep purple shade under his eyelids and splashed out clear into his waking thoughts. Those dreams tore him, angles, Santas or River of Hearts, Alice or Satan playgrounds or jackhammers, Oz or reality. The foreboding was uplifting, constantly crying out of facets, culverts, creeks, come to the Horicon Marsh. Water washed everywhere, that sleep in which the first voice spoke alone, booming, smoking, dripping with cattail reeds, in flames dimmed by the dancing sun, a lilac, cinnamon, more sun, ... And we'll get to Blackhawk's Fire after the music.
Now the purpose for my mnemonic. At the end of this memorial, there will be a toast to Frank. And if you haven't partaken, there is coffee, and for those for whom it is age appropriate, alcoholic enrichment, which we all think Frank would approve of and encourage for those who are so inclined. So, before that toast, you have an opportunity to go and get some of that. And now I've reminded you that it's available. I think some of you already found it. This next song is a song about how we really can't control all that much of what fate brings us, but we can keep track of our promises, and I think Frank did a wonderful job of that. I'm not Cajun at all. I have no Cajun heritage. But I love the music, and I call this my Norwegian Cajun song.
With our lives, we made our lives. When the seasons come and go, our fortunes flow like the waters of a bayou. They rise and fall, and they come and go. But through it all, I stay beside you. No matter where the winds of change might toss and blow. No matter where the winds of change might toss and blow.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
Hello again. For those of you who may have missed it, my name is Stephanie Keltigeroni, and Frank has been one of my dearest friends for the last 20 years. It all began the day after I made my first public address to the Rockford School Board. I guess it must have been a pretty good speech, because the next night, Chris Bowman called me, even though I had never heard of him before in my life. He wanted to know exactly who I was. I told him that I was just an accountant and a soccer mom who didn't think it was right to spend so much money on half-baked educational theories. He told me to hold on a minute and asked if I knew Frank Schier. And I said, no, I know who he is, but I don't know him. Well, hold on, we're going to conference him in. For the next hour, they grilled me. They wanted to know where I got my information. Who was I? What was in it for me? Apparently I passed their test, because from that day forward, I found that I had somehow forged this family that included two bickering, cantankerous, slightly gluttonous, opinionated, and difficult middle-aged older brothers who became, overnight, my mentors, my sounding boards, my greatest supporters, and my closest confidants for the rest of their respective days. And I got to be their mediator. I was a very lucky girl. Frank didn't waste time on people or things he didn't feel passionately about, personally or professionally. He left his mark on everyone and everywhere he loved. One just has to look to the Rock River Times, the Rock River Trail Initiative, the River District Association, Winnebago Buy Local, and the Rammy Awards to see his lasting legacy. He worked hard and played even harder. Downtown was his playground, and he was my very favorite playmate. I will miss our adventures, our talks, our date nights, and the river cruises, which frequently felt like abductions. My ex-husband and son thought nothing of me announcing that I had a date night with Frank, other than they had no idea when he would return me. Sometimes we even let them join us. The first date night was a little disconcerting. I barely knew him, and when he came to pick me up, I got into his van and commented that it looked like something a pedophile might drive. He laughed that laugh of his and said, I call it the love machine. I never was comfortable in that van. I will miss the many nights spent on his boat, especially the pontoon that I lovingly named the junk barge. It was abused and boasted an illuminated, rotating disco ball, a perpetually damp upholstered futon, and a camping toilet with a shower for privacy, a shower curtain. I had spent my entire life boating and sailing without even one episode of seasickness. But there was something about that junk barge. Or it may have been the fact that it frequently broke down and left us free-floating. And the drinking may have played a part. Drinking with Frank meant a minimum of 5 different types of alcohol on a given evening. I am grateful that Frank let me share this journey with him. Since I opened Magpie last year and now had closer proximity with a limitless pantry to to satisfy whatever random cravings he was having, I had the pleasure of feeding Frank much more often. He had come in a couple of days in a row asking me to make him something to make him feel better because he thought he might be getting sick. It took 2 days before he would tell me what was going on. And when he did, all I could say, sorry, I think I need a drink, was, oh honey, that's not sick. Within the week, he was busy trying to fight cancer while tidying up the loose ends of his life. And I was busy planning the first benefit. The benefit was beautiful. The outpouring of love and the generosity of literally hundreds of people. Afterwards, Frank kept pestering me for a date night on a weekend, which doesn't really work with my restaurant schedule. But in December, we finally made it happen. We went out to dinner, not downtown, which is what downtowners do when they want some privacy. And he ordered nearly everything on the menu and told me to pick out a bottle of wine, which was not part of the cancer diet he'd been following and that I'd been cooking for the past several weeks. Over dinner, we talked like we'd never talked before, filling in all the little details we hadn't yet touched upon in 20 years. Our hopes and dreams, his regrets that he didn't want me to repeat. He thanked me for the best gift anyone had ever given him. I assumed he meant the money that was raised to help him cover his expenses and get things settled. And I told him it was nothing. By far the easiest fundraiser I've ever done. So many people came forward to help. Then we returned downtown for drinks, lots of drinks, where he told me it was our last night out, ever. And I thought to myself, this might be the best gift anyone's given me. But I get it now. Looking out at all of you, seeing all of you one last time while he was still the Frank we know and love, that was the greatest gift. And I'm so thankful that we were able to give him that. There's so much more I'd like to share, but I'm afraid if I do, it would lead to a public display of emotion that would have made Frank say, "Stop being such a girl." To which my standard response was, "When you stop being such a pig." And anyway, I had promised Frank I would write future articles, and maybe this way I'll feel obligated enough to follow through. I know this wasn't a traditional memorial service, and I hope no one was offended or will be by what comes next. But Frank was a slightly offensive guy. He was a little weird, and I have to think he would have liked it. He didn't give me any instructions other than the names of 3 people who were not allowed to attend any event. And that none of them were to be sad. He mentioned a few times in his last months that if he were to die, they, and I still don't know who they are, would probably put him in a canoe and set him on fire on the river. So we're going to do that today. So, everybody have something to toast with that wants it? On that strange note, let's have a toast at a memorial service because it just seems like the right thing to do. To Frank. The family would also like me to remind you